Hello, everyone, and welcome to Art School Live with Eric Rhodes, who isn't here. So, while the cat is away, the mice will play. So let's get rid of Eric. Here we go. Charlie Easton, that's me. Check out my work on my website, charlieeaston.com, or my Instagram @CharlieEaston if you're interested in seeing what I'm doing. But today is not about me. Today is about a great artist that if you don't know him already, you soon will. His name is Rich Gallego, and he is going to be with us here today to talk about a really cool, nerdy topic that I am going to totally get into. And I'm sure you will too. Rich is based down in LA County in Southern California. He does a ton of teaching. He's actually got an interesting little tidbit that he's going to throw in around that today, a little secret for you. He's a member of 𝗨𝗶𝗵. He's been on the faculty at the Plein Air Convention, represented by some great galleries. Go to richgallego.com. That's RichGallego.com, and you'll get the picture pretty quickly that this guy can paint. So I'm thrilled to be learning with him today, with you from him today. And I know what he's going to talk about is, as I said, it's the kind of thing that gets me all nerdy about color. So I'm really looking forward to this. Rich, welcome.
Hi, Charlie. Thanks for the intro. I love that. Yeah, it is kind of a nerdy topic, but it's the kind of thing that I think is really helpful, especially if you're early in your painting journey. You know, there's a lot of people that they struggle with value and color, and while it may seem innate to some people to just figure them out, there are ways that you can kind of separate the two and end up with paintings that are harmonious, where the value relationships are accurate. So what
So you're going to be teaching us about, what's the topic?
It's using a modified Zorn palette.
I love it.
And the purpose of this, for me anyway, I discovered this and realized the value in it is, I teach my students all the time that one of the most important things is value relationships. And we've all heard the old adage that, color gets all the credit and value does all the work. Well, getting those relationships spot on is going to help make your paintings a lot more, just a lot better in general. And it doesn't matter if it's a low key or high key or mid key, as long as the relationships are accurate. And so by using a modified Zorn palette, which is, in my case, titanium white, chromatic black, cad red light, and yellow ochre. So this is very modified, very neutralized. And what it does is it's such a low chroma palette that it forces you to focus on value relationships. And there's no ultramarine, there's no blue. It's a chromatic black. Now, for those who aren't aware, chromatic black is a Gamblin color, and it's phthalocyan emerald and quinacridone red. So it's a very dark transparent green and a dark transparent red. And then, of course, yellow ochre instead of a cad yellow or a cad lemon, which is what I would normally use. So what I'm going to be doing today is recreating a painting I did at Canyonlands National Park in Utah. And, we don't have 2 hours or whatever to do this. So forgive me, folks, if I don't get through the whole thing, but I think I'll get far enough to make the point. So let's get started.
Yeah, let's do it. And I think Amandine's just going to play a little quick clip, and we're going to do the intro again just for people who've just arrived. Amandine, over to you.
Art School Live with Eric Rhodes.
Fantastic. So I'm Charlie Easton. I'm here pinch hitting for Eric Rhodes, and I'm with the fantastic artist Rich Gallego, who's going to be teaching us about the Modified Zorn Palette. Look at some of his work. Epic stuff. And so Rich is going to tell us about the Modified Zorn Palette. And so I'm not going to cut into any of your time because I just want to learn. Let's hear it, Rich.
Yeah, so as I said, there's no blue and there's not a true yellow, it's just a yellow ochre. So it's very neutralized. So I've already toned my canvas here and sort of done a wipeout for the basic shapes. And I'm going to start with my darks, which are going to stay relatively thin. And, I'll go back into them as I finish the painting and modify things. But just to get the big shapes placed, This is a mixture of the chromatic black and cad red light. And when this starts to really show up, the value of it is when I get all the shapes blocked in. You can see how they work together. Now, for those of you who maybe never have watched me paint before, I have to warn you, every painting I've ever done looks horrible at some point, but it's just the process. Hopefully they don't stay that way. And this, you can see I'm painting very thinly. But as I said, I'll go back into all of these shapes. Now, the thing about the chromatic black instead of blue is you'd be surprised at if you add a little bit of white to it, which I'm going to do for the sky. I'm going to add a lot of white to it, actually. It becomes a gray, but it's a colorful gray, as the term chromatic implies. So I'm just going to block in the sky, and it actually does look fairly blue next to other colors. Some of you may wonder, why I'm kind of approaching this in what might look like a sort of haphazard way. I don't like getting too tight if I can help it. And, my work ends up fairly realist, whether I want it to or not. And I'm not going to draw out, perfect trees and perfect rocks. I find it's a lot faster to block things in this way. And since this is all fairly thin, I'm going to go back and change things anyway. But this way I can start getting the value relationships where I want them, which, as I said, is extremely important.
Right.
You can get away.
Sorry, Rich, can I just interrupt just very briefly? I got a couple of questions here asking about Zorn, and I was just going to say for our attendees, Anders Zorn was a Swedish painter who he kind of pioneered this palette that was cadmium red, black, yellow ochre, and titanium white. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, well, I think he used a different black. There wasn't, I don't believe Gamblin was making chromatic black back then.
Right.
But yeah, and to be honest, I'm not sure which black he was using, but again, it was a stand-in for the blue.
Yeah. And
the benefit of it is that it, as I said, it forces one to use value relationships or focus on value relationships. Now, the thing is, at the end of it, if you wanted to go back and add a little bit of more, intense color with some other colors out of the tube, you can do that. But then what you have is a neutralized painting where the pops of color you put in are really effective. Mm-hmm. Instead of, fighting with other colors that are there. So I'm just going to put in, this is a suggestion of a background cliff that's back there. For those of you who haven't been, Canyonlands National Park in Utah, it's very arid desert climate, but it's really spectacular and certainly worth visiting.
Oh, it's an unbelievable place. Coming from the Pacific Northwest up here, Rich, when I got down there, all of my color relationships had shifted enormously.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've had a couple of occasions where I was teaching a week-long workshop in Hawaii, got home for a day, and then immediately went to Taos, New Mexico to teach. And just the difference in chroma, it really takes you a minute to,
yeah,
So, all right, now I'm going to block in a tree that's in this scene. And again, this is just the chromatic that I'm going to be using. So I'm just placing objects right now, but you can already tell that the colors is pretty muted. And again, there's two things that achieves for me. It forces me to focus on value relationships, but it also, you end up with a painting that's, fairly harmonious as far as color. I don't like painting scenes that end up looking like, there's so many bright colors competing with one another that it's kind of like a Disneyland sort of scene. Or at least that's the way I describe it.
Yeah, kind of like the way I paint, Rich.
Well,
it's okay. It's okay. It's all good.
Yeah, no. I mean, we all have different different approaches, and you can control it because everything, and what I've seen of your paintings, everything relates well to one another. I haven't practiced that, and I fear that if I tried doing that, it would get way out of control.
Yeah, you know what, right, Rich, I appreciate that, and certainly something, and I know this isn't about me, but something I've noticed in my art is, as I've progressed, the way that, as you say, you can get objects to relate to each other has become better, and so the paintings become more sympathetic, and that doesn't mean that they become less dynamic, but
Right.
having color harmony between pieces, between elements in your scene is so important, and I can see it in your work all the time. And I think, how much do you paint in this Modified Zorn palette?
Oh, I do it a lot when I have students, because it's kind of something I make all of them go through at one point or another, because
Right.
I think that idea of getting the value relationships correct is so important. But as for my own painting, I do it once in a while just to keep me honest.
Yeah.
But I don't do it every time out. I just think it's a really good exercise for people to do.
Yeah, for sure.
So
yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to get a little bit of the light color on the rocks. Like I said, just blocked in, and it's still very thin. And things are going to get, changed as I go through. It's funny to me when I'm outside painting, and I do a lot of plein air work, and I try to paint in the studio similarly to the way I paint outdoors. It's just easier for me if I don't have to keep switching methods, But a lot of times people come up and they see it at this stage and they're not quite sure what to say about it, because it doesn't really look like much. But try to assure them, come back in an hour or so. It'll be a lot more impressive, hopefully.
Right. I do know what I'm doing. Can I just ask? So, under that highlight there, have you rubbed off some of the underpainting? Is that why it appears whiter?
Yeah. So in the interest of time, I toned the canvas, and then I just used little terps to get the basic shapes drawn in. Yeah.
So that aids the luminosity of your lighter areas.
Yeah, and I used for the underpaint, I just used yellow ochre, and then wiped it back with terps.
Okay.
And from here, I'm going to get a little bit. So with this, I got a little bit of the sky color in here, but it makes a nice gray. So I'm just going to incorporate that right there. Yeah, I tend to paint my shapes and leave a little bit of space between them at the outset, and I'll go back later on when I'm working edges and fill things in, or make changes if I need to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get so probably the most chromatic color on this palette is the Cad Red Light, and I don't want to get too crazy with it. But there is a lot of red rock up in this scene. Okay, and I want to get a little bit more toward orange there.
So getting the orange, you're mixing your cadmium red light with your yellow ochre.
Yeah. See if I can get a little bit less pastel-y.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure pastel-y is a word, but there you go.
So just a reminder for those people who are tuning in, Rich is using a modified Zorn palette. So he's only using 5 colors. Is that right?
4, actually.
4. Yeah. Chromatic black, cadmium red light, the yellow ochre, and the titanium white.
Correct.
That's it. Right. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. And get this sky brought down here so that we cover the bare canvas.
Rich, you're pulling them in. They're coming from all over. In fact, we have somebody from Sweden, so they'll be familiar with the with the work of Anders Zorn. If any of you have any time later on today, go and check out Zorn's work. It's kind of incredible how he could extract such luminosity from so few colors.
Yeah, I always think of him kind of in the same league with, Sorolla and Sargent.
Yeah.
So if people are not familiar with him, make yourself familiar with him, because it's really worth the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, folks, don't be alarmed if you see this and go, my goodness, I can do better than that. It's not done. Which, by the way, I would encourage people, if you're early on in this process of learning how to paint, I hear people all the time, my students, that'll look at something they're doing and it's, halfway done. Oh, it's just not working. It's not right. It's not this. I'd encourage you not to judge your painting before it's ready to be judged.
Mm-hmm.
Not fair to you. It's not fair to the painting. So take your time and keep working it. Like I said, everything I've ever painted at some point looks like a mess. And the key is making sure it doesn't stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
Cleaning the brush off here, getting some of this light out of here, because I'm going to go back into the dark passages here in a minute. Okay, so all this is very thin, and this is very rudimentary. I haven't even addressed any of the foliage in the foreground yet. But I want to start getting into the shadows here. I love painting rock shadows because I can get in there and play in them all day long. I mean, there's so much color bouncing around in these red rocks. So I'm going to get some thicker paint in here, and then I'll start looking at some of the reflected light and various lights and darks within the dark. But for right now, I'm looking to make sure that things are going to relate properly. But what I mean by that, folks, is when I look at my reference, which I hope, you guys have it up on the screen there.
Yeah, it's on the left-hand side. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to make sure that this dark is relating properly to the sky color, at least in the right neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a light part like the sunlit rocks, I want to make sure that they're relating properly as well, so that I don't have far more contrast or far less contrast somewhere than I'm supposed to. Now, one thing I'm going to mention with respect to these strokes I'm putting on, I'm getting gradually thicker in the darks. These dark passages, eventually I'm going to have mostly vertical strokes like this. And the reason for that, in case, and again, for folks, if you already know some of this stuff, forgive me, I don't know what everybody's baseline knowledge level is. But it's because if I make horizontal strokes in darks, the way that the little bristles make these little track marks, and light reflects differently. The viewer will have light reflected up into their eyes by the little track marks. Whereas if I try to keep my darks predominantly with vertical strokes, the light is diffused sideways, and it makes the darks appear darker. So sometimes we have to be cognizant of just the physics of light.
That is a great tip. And I did not know that, Rich. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
There's been so many times when I've needed it to go darker.
Yeah.
And maybe I just need to change the angle of my brush. That's cracking.
Yeah. Well, the bristles leave all those little tracks, and light bounces off the ridges, even though they're very small. And it changes the way we perceive those strokes. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to get this really dark, and then I'll come in with some reds and some other things to make these a little more interesting. And I'm always trying to be cognizant of shapes as well. I'm not liking this. It's too uniform, so I want to stretch this out a bit. One of the things that I do, you want to talk about nerdy stuff, Charlie, I'm into peak shifting. And what peak shifting is, hold on, folks, is changing the aspect ratio of a shape. And in human terms, people who actually speak, human languages, what that means is, if I have a shape that's sort of too uniform and kind of boring, if I make one side a little longer than it is, exaggerate it just a bit, it can make it a more interesting shape. So this was a good example. If this shape was just kind of this domed thing that came down here,
yeah,
it's too uniform and it's static and boring. But by extending this over here a bit, it makes it a bit more dynamic.
Right.
And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about peak shifting.
Huh, that's peak shifting. I like it. This is good, Rich. I'm getting all sorts of notes.
Yeah, well, you guys, I had a prior career in science, so I kind of tend to go that way.
Yeah.
But I found that it helps me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I often think of objects within a scene as having weight, or thinking about them as heft. And what you just done as well by extending that left side is you've moved the center of gravity of that object away from the edge.
Yeah. And I mean, if you want to, in maybe even simpler terms, it kind of creates a pointer into the painting instead of outside of the painting.
Yep.
So I try always to be cognizant of design as well, because if we do this, this whole painting endeavor well, yeah, we're giving somebody something pretty to look at, or something that they can, relate to. Joy, but we want to be able to lead the eye through the painting in a specific way, where they're pausing in a spot here and they're going over this way and then they're going this way. You don't want anybody going straight to the focal point and then they're done. So you want to lead through in a meandering sort of way and kind of control where they linger and where they stop, where they start. Essentially, we're controlling their minds without them knowing about it if we do it well. And that might sound a little bit a little evil, but I don't mean
this day and age. It's pretty. That's what's happening all over the place.
Yeah, well, this is a little less dangerous anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I had a couple of questions. Just what you're mixing into your oils there, Rich. There's to make them thinner. Are you just using mineral spirits?
Just terps right now. Yeah, I use Gamsol.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So, I've got a basic idea of what I'm doing here at this point. I want to get a couple of these bushes in, and this is not going to be an exact duplicate of the reference there, but I think it'll be enough to get the point across is what we're doing. So as I was saying, with regards to leading the eye around, if I have some darks here in the foreground, and then I kind of, step people through like stepping stones almost. So what I want to do is have people come in here and maybe come along this. There's a lot of contrast here and a fairly hard line. I'll have them come around this way, maybe take the path of light up this way. Ultimately, I'm going to try and put the brightest, most chromatic light right about here. So you might want to call that a focal point. But I want him to come around this way and then up this way and back here, maybe linger here for a bit and then end up here. So I'm always thinking about design as I'm going through this. And sometimes, I'll find that, there's something I'm doing isn't working. So I'll have to kind of recalculate and figure out what it is that isn't working. And that's fine. For me, the act of painting is so satisfying for a number of reasons. Well, one of them is I get to go out and spend time working in beautiful locations, but the other is that it's a mental exercise. It always keeps my mind active, trying to figure out not just how to solve a problem, but what's the right. You don't have to just figure out the right answer. You got to figure out what is the right question to ask first. And that's why I firmly believe that when you find really good painters that you like, they're not very often, very stupid people or anything. People usually got something going on upstairs, because this is not an easy thing for just anybody to do well. But I do like the mental exercise that it gives my brain. And Charlie, what do you like? I tell people all the time that I try to find things that exercise my brain in other ways too, just to keep it as elastic as possible, because I think that way I'm more open to possibilities for different compositions and things like that. Do you have a similar experience or any thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, you know, one of my favorite things to do is to go to a life drawing class with paints, because everyone else is doing a 10-minute sketch in, you know, charcoal.
Yeah.
And if you take 3 colors, and actually it'd be great to take the Zorn palette as you're working with today. I know obviously Zorn had great success painting flesh tones, but just take a limited palette and go to a life drawing class and do exactly what you're doing. Basically break down the shapes of the body into, you know, take the three-dimensional shapes and turn them into 2-dimensional shapes on a canvas. It's so tricky, and you get your ass or you get your butt, you know, handed to you, if you excuse my French. But it's a great way of just changing it up, and I couldn't agree more. Just like keeping yourself on your toes, is a great thing to do.
Yeah, and I find that it just makes the whole endeavor more enjoyable if I'm constantly learning things. And you know, you can learn a lot from going to somebody's workshop or buying somebody's instructional DVD. But
we'll talk about that.
You can also learn a lot, you know, just from experimenting. In fact, I tell my students all the time that if you really want to get good at this, you're going to have to ruin some of the best things you've ever done by experimentation.
Totally.
And, you know, not let any of it become too precious.
Yeah.
Because really, when that happens, it's ego, because you think, oh, I've got something that looks good here. And you know, it becomes so important to you that you're not willing to sacrifice it in the name of progress, if you will. But I think that's really a necessary thing to do sometimes. You know, be willing to say, okay, well, I need to explore a little further and see if I can push the boundaries and come up with something even more interesting. You know, personally, and I don't know if this will happen, but it's a goal, and I think having the goal, you know, is a worthy endeavor. I would like to, by the time I'm, you know, finished on this earth, I would like to have added something unique to the body of knowledge that we painters have to draw from. You know, I mean, I've learned from a lot of different other people. You know, I always am looking for something to come up with something that nobody's ever talked about before, or do it in a way that no one's talked about. I don't know. To me, that sounds like a pretty cool legacy to leave. You know.
Definitely. So a lot of people are interested in this green that you're working with, and I'm assuming it's the yellow ochre and the black that's making that beautiful green.
Yeah, it's the chromatic black and the yellow ochre, but and I'm sorry, I should have explained this. I went in with this sort of dirt color, where it's going to be the dirt color, and normally if I want to get something dark, I'd wipe the light back, because it's really hard to, as you know, make something dark when there's light paint there already. But I wanted this to mix in with it. It just, you see that the chromatic black being with the greens, and whether you add some light to it or not, you get these really natural looking greens. And the reason for that is, as I said, it's a dark transparent red and a dark transparent green. So you already have complement. You don't have to neutralize it by adding a bit of red to your green, right? And
the unity is great.
I'm sorry?
The unity is great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's and in this desert environment, you know, the greens don't tend to be, you know, very saturated, cool greens. They tend to be rather dry, warm greens like this. So and it works out well. So yeah, I just went straight into the stuff that was there already, knowing that I could incorporate it into that. Switch to a somewhat smaller brush here and start working those rocks a little bit. And that's the other thing. Typically, whether I'm in the studio or whether I'm outdoors painting, I don't like to paint. You know, some people, they'll paint the background to foreground, or they'll paint from the focal point outward. And you know, there's a lot of ways to do it and end up with good results. I'm not saying that those are wrong, but knowing the way my brain works, I need to work all over the canvas and keep coming back, because that way I can relate one thing to the other all the time. If I start with, you know, the background and then the midground, everything's going to look like a focal area. And I don't want that.
Right.
The way we observe the landscape as humans is, you know, we're hunter-gatherers, so we tend to focus on what it is we're trying to pick or hunt, and we see that in high definition, but everything in our peripheral vision is, you know, out of focus, not quite as detailed.
Mm-hmm.
So if I paint everything with the same level of detail like I would have, you know, copying a photograph, that's not the way human beings experience the world. That's the way a camera experiences the world.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to do is move around and keep, you know, comparing one shape to another. And then I can come back and do things like, you know, make sure that whatever this is over here, like this hard edge, and whether it's there that way or not, I'm going to soften it because it's so far towards the side of the canvas. I don't want to pull the viewer's eye over there if my focal point is going to be over here. So you have to be willing to make modifications, and, you know, instead of this being a chiseled sharp edge, maybe it's a softer rounded edge for the sake of the painting. Because what that does is already this releases the eye to go where there's sharper edges, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
the other thing that's happened that is really something that everyone should know is the way that you position the overlaps. You're talking about the stepping stones of the shrubs moving towards the rocks. Like as soon as you put those little overlaps of the shrub in front of the rock, it positioned it in space.
Yeah, so there are, I think, what is it, 6 different tools that we have in our bag of tricks, so to speak. There's diminution of form. In other words, things get smaller as they go back into the distance.
Mm-hmm.
There's overlapping of forms, which is what you're talking about. There's the idea that warms advance and cools recede. There's edges getting softer as he goes into the distance. There's the compression of the value range, meaning as you go into the distance, the darks get lighter and the lights get darker, so there's less contrast. Even if you can see a shadow on something 2 miles away, the contrast isn't the same as something that's right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's the lack of, or the lessening of chroma as you go into space. So that's 6 different ways that we can indicate depth of field, right? So I want to use whatever I can that's at my disposal to hopefully make my painting look more believable.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put that here. Now, within all of these shadowed parts, there's some areas where there's striations because it's sedimentary rock, and so I'll get something that's dark but a bit warmer, and, you know, say, well, there's a band of rock here that is a little bit, you know, you don't want just a dark, boring area. And in this case, the rock actually was, you know, had these features. And I hope that's showing up on the camera.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay. And, you know, there's areas where it's still within the shadow, but it's a bit lighter. Maybe a bit more of the yellow ochre tone.
Reflected light in the shadows, Rich. That's where you make your money.
Yeah. Well, and you know, what I've noticed, it occurs to me that a lot of times most of the chroma is someplace like it's where the light and shadow meet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if I've got an area where I can say, okay, we've got light and shadow right here, maybe right along this edge where my focal area is going to be, I get something a bit more chromatic. And it's not, you know, it's not garish, but relative to the neutralized color I've got going on, I may say, okay, that's not even enough. Let me see if I put some pure cad red in there. And it'll work, you know.
Yeah. Makes for a very warm transition.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll keep working the shadows here, and you can do this all day long and find all kinds of interesting things. And maybe I'll come into it with a straight chromatic black right underneath it to get it even darker in some places.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'll work on those areas, and like I said, I'll go back and forth and go to something else because I don't want it to become a focal point. But I do want to do something with these. This is a little bit wider than I want. So one of the things I talk about is asymmetric rhythms, and again, you're getting the whole nerdy package today here, Charlie.
Yeah, I love it.
With asymmetric rhythms, you can think of it, and people have seen my demos. They know I always talk about this. Think of it in terms of common time in music, which is 4 beats per measure, and it sounds like this. Well, look at the way that these light bands are positioned. There's a different distance between here and here, between this light and this light, between this one and this one, and then there's a shorter distance here. So these are asymmetric in that they're not equidistantly spaced. And that would sound more like, and it's more of a syncopated rhythm. And the reason I want to do that is because there's been studies. The one I'm most familiar with is from the University of Chicago's music department that says that people's brains connect with and stay engaged with for a longer time and a deeper level with asymmetry than they do with symmetrical rhythms. So if these, light edges were all equidistantly spaced, I still wouldn't paint them that way. Mm-hmm. It's just not as interesting to the brain. And again, anything I can use to get people to engage with my paintings at a deeper level for a longer period of time, I'm going to try and use.
Absolutely.
So, I'm just finding there's little crevices and things on these rocks. But I'm going to scrape back a little bit because I want this to be a razor thin edge of light here. And unfortunately, that was painted pretty thinly to begin with.
So that the oil paint that you put down originally has set up a little bit. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. So I can come back thicker and bring this up and make that a much. So now this bit of light is not nearly as wide as this or this or this. I want variety in all things if I can achieve it. And in nature, you're more likely to see something like that than a situation where it looks like a picket fence, right? Mm-hmm. So that's another good reason to do it. How are we doing on time, Charlie? I don't want to.
Yeah, you got about 10 minutes, Rich.
Oh, good. So let me get to this tree a bit more, flesh that out a little.
A lot of people can't believe that sky was painted with black.
Yeah, I know. It's really kind of a trip. But
I know it's chromatic black, but yes.
Yeah, it speaks to the relative nature of things, though.
Yeah.
On the palette, it looks positively gray.
Yeah.
But you put it up next to some other color, and it looks more blue. And I'll show you something in a minute that they'll see that it is gray a little bit more obviously. I want to get a little light over here. And I'm just laying paint on and turning the brush. I tell people to make strokes that are in service to that which they're painting. And what I mean by that is if you're painting something like foliage, which is a lot of leaves and things like that, you can turn the brush and roll the brush and you'll get a nice soft edge. If you're painting rocks, you want to make more chiseled, hard strokes because it needs to not really only look like rocks. It needs to feel like rocks. Mm-hmm. At least that's the way I approach it. And I'm going to bring this over because I don't like the uniform shape. Honestly, I'm glad that it's the case because it would be a lot harder to make a living if everyone was doing it. But I can't understand why everybody doesn't want to spend time painting. There's something about moving the paint around, the tactile nature of the oil paint that I just adore.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let me get into this background a little bit. We got 2 layers of mountains are really mesas, I guess, back there. And I want to lighten the farthest one back. So this needs to be darker than the sky, but lighter than the closer mesa. Again, just so I can have that semblance of depth.
And are you on linen there, Rich?
Yeah, I prefer painting on oil primed linen. I mean, I painted on a number of surfaces. I'll sometimes take 300-pound watercolor paper and cover it with waxless shellac, and that makes a really interesting surface to paint with oils on as well. But yeah, my go-to is I prefer the oil primed linen. Yeah. This particular panel is a 𝗠ście𝗱𝗶𝗳𝗏𝗃, I believe. So it's got a little bit rougher weave than something like a Centurion panel might have. Okay. A bit more of the yellows, lighter yellows in the rock here. And I would really encourage everybody, especially if you're early in this painting endeavor, get a piece of cardboard or something that you don't really care about. Don't waste a nice linen panel on it, but and take one brush and see how many different kinds of marks it can make, because I think you'll be surprised at how versatile the brushes are. A moment ago over here, I was loading the brush up and rolling it and trying to get a certain effect. And now when I'm painting rock, it's much more deliberate, direct sort of strokes. But, get really familiar with your tools, because if you don't know how to use them to their fullest advantage, you're kind of shortchanging yourself more than anything. And, this is something that I experience with students all the time. I'll ask them to do that, and I don't think most of them bother, but I find it's really helpful, because, I'll have some student ask me, well, how come you're painting the whole painting with one brush, which I've done, not today, but I've done it. I rarely use more than two, and it's because they're very versatile. You just got to know what they're capable of.
Yeah, and my limited experience with the Zorn palette as well, I think the way that you get to understand it and the subtleties of it is just through play. And so it's the same brush, as what you're talking about with understanding your brush, understand your palette. It creates one less variable, one less factor that can go wrong in a painting. You're limiting it through knowledge and confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a difficult enough thing to do. Just, naturally, you don't need to make it more difficult by battling with your tools and your materials, so get to know them, see what they're capable of. Okay, I'm going to show you something before we don't have time. So we were talking about the sky and this chromatic black and white, which is all that is. So what if I didn't want this to be a blue sky day? What if there was some clouds in the area and I wanted some blue sky to break through? Well, I've got this base for a sky here. I'm going to, just for the sake of showing people how this works, I'm going to get a little bit of ultramarine, which is not part of this particular palette, and a little bit of white. But now you're going to see the difference chromatically. I could, if I wanted, choose to make all this sky more like gray sky and say, well, there's some blue showing through. And now suddenly all that that gray that, you know, people thought, wow, that looks really blue, considering that it's chromatic black. Now that becomes gray, and it's, you know, maybe it's clouds, right?
Interesting.
And the way that you would enhance that is just to go to the edges of the little, it's almost sky holes that I just put in the sky, right?
Yeah.
Now you go to the edge of that with a little bit of the yellow ochre and some titanium white, and you say, well, there's these gray clouds are catching some light here. So now, instead of this being the sky, it's cloud mass, and there's blue sky poking through. Is that coming across?
It is, yeah. I think the camera is still trying to make the gray look bluer than it actually is, but you can definitely see where you've placed the blue,
Yeah.
how much more chroma there is, especially at that point where it's next door to the sort of the orangey rock. So you kind of position that in the viewer. Yeah,
and so then you take advantage of the complementary color thing going on with the orange rock and the blue sky, right? And you can do that, you know, anywhere. I mean, I'll go a little higher where the blue would be a little bit darker, and maybe it'll be a bit more apparent.
Oh yeah, you can see that straight away.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
So suddenly you've got more interest in the sky than you did before, and what you thought was blue sky is really gray clouds with blue sky coming through. But the thing is that's, you know, one of two. The CAD red light is also quite chromatic, but all of this is very neutralized until you pop that in, and it really makes that sing a bit, you know?
Yeah.
So that's, if you think, well, I don't want to do, you know, boring neutralized paintings all the time. I don't think that is boring, but some people might say, well, I like color more. Well, this is, you know, when you have a bunch of useful grays and then you put a pop of something chromatic, that chroma really sings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to keep in mind.
For sure. Well, that's great. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything else that you want to show us on the painting here, or can we talk about your well-kept secret?
Well, the well-kept secret. Yeah, let's let people know about that. So, with this demo today, I tried to, you know, talk about a few different things. Obviously, the main lesson was using the Modified Zorn Palette and how it can help keep your paintings harmonious and keep you focused on value relationships, which are so important. But there's other little things, you know, asymmetric rhythms and all that kind of stuff, using a vertical stroke for darks. If you want to have access to that stuff and so much more, and if it's okay, I'm going to turn the camera toward me here. If you want access to that information and a whole lot more, the really exciting news for me is my first instructional video with PaintTube TV drops tomorrow, is the official release date. Although I believe if you go to PaintTube TV, was it painttube.tv? There it is. I believe you can buy it today if you wanted. I think that it was a real treat going down and you know, putting this together and talking with Eric, and there's a really good interview involved with it. But they did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Streamline Publishing does a great job with these things, and I'm really proud of this, largely because of how well they do their jobs. But I think it's worth it. There's a lot of information that I think you'll find useful in learning to paint better. And other than that, yeah, my website.
That's fantastic, Rich. I can't wait to check it out myself. I think it's you know, from the little bit that I've learned today, there must be tons more in there. So thanks so much. And everyone, you've got to go and check out richgallego.com. Go and see the other work that Rich has been doing, his plein air work. There's some gouache work on your which is a great, you know, you're talking about changing things up to keep it fresh. Go and work in another medium.
Yeah, I love gouache. It's a really cool medium. So yeah, just keep exploring, folks. That's what this is about.
And isn't that the joy of what we do? It's just keeping exploring.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thanks so much, Rich. That was a great demo. Great to see you using the Modified Zorn palette. and just throwing in that little bit of ultramarine at the end there really kind of gave it a kick. I think I'm definitely going to go and going to put out those colors and give it a go this morning. And yeah, I look forward to chatting with you another time.
Yeah.
For the rest of you guys, just got a couple of announcements to make. Let's just go to that. Yeah. So as Rich said, go on to painttube.tv and check out his new video, Autumn Gold: Paint Landscapes with Impact. You saw the header there. I think it bodes to be a great video. There's another gift for you. We've got a free ebook with 201 essential plein air painting tips. So go to pleinairmagazine.com/ebook and you'll be able to get that. What else have we got? Oh, 𝗂𝗶𝗰 𝗵𝗵, great painter. Got some really good, had a really great chat with her down at the plein air convention this year. But 𝗂𝗶𝗰 𝗵𝗵, Carol Peebles, and Carrie Stober are going to be having a 1-hour conversation to discuss how you can find your authentic voice and grow your art career. That's happening on Wednesday, October the 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So you need to reserve your spot today by going to streamlineartevents.com/roundtable. So yeah, that'll be a good conversation. And then the final thing for me to say is about Acrylic Live. And I know I mentioned this the last few days, but I'm going to be co-hosting it with Eric from March 26th to 28th with an optional Essentials Day on the 25th. We've got a great lineup of artists who are going to be there: Carla Bosch, Anne Blair Brown, Jed Dorsey, Mike Hernandez, Kevin McPherson, loads more. And you're going to get to listen to me doing an outdoor demo in acrylics. I saw today there was tons of people talking about the Zorn palette in acrylics. Yes, the Zorn palette does work in acrylics. So just keep playing, as Rich was saying there. Keep playing and keep exploring. Try it in acrylic, and yeah, you'll have some fun. And that's what the aim is for Acrylic Live as well. Learning tons while having fun. So yeah, the final thing, make sure you subscribe to this channel, Art School Live on YouTube, and at Eric Rhodes on Instagram. Follow Rich Gallego on Instagram too. And yeah, as I said, I'm Charlie Easton. Thanks for tuning in today. And that's all for today. Tomorrow we got 𝗄𝗶𝗰𝗵, one of my absolute heroes. He's going to be on here tomorrow, and I can't wait to chat with Joe. He's always a joy to talk with, and more importantly, fantastic to see paint. So thanks everyone, and see you tomorrow.